Hello, and welcome back to the BHF Boardroom Series. I'm Matt Hughes, founder of Accommodate Consulting and creator of the business of hotel franchising. In this series, we explore the decisions, structures, and behaviors that ultimately shape performance inside franchised hotels. After last week's episode with Graham Norris from In Practice, where we focused on operational excellence, today we move upstream into the organizational and strategic foundations that determine whether a hotel or group can actually grow. I'm joined by Raheel Baggia, founder of Straight Path Consultancy. Raheel has spent more than 20 years advising global brands and leadership teams on organizational design, strategic planning, and commercial clarity. His work sits at the intersection of structural behavior and execution, helping hospitality businesses scale intelligently, avoid inertia, and translate strategy into real results. Raheel, great to have you here.
Same here. Thank you for having me, man.
So let's jump straight in. Raheel, before we dive into frameworks and strategy, I'd love to start with the pattern recognition you've built over the years. When you walk into a hotel organization or ownership group for the first time, what's the moment or behavior that immediately tells you whether the business is positioned for growth or drifting without clarity?
That's a very, very good question. I think pattern recognition is exactly the tool that's required. I tend to look at it from a two-lens pattern recognition. I call it structure and culture. When I walk into a hotel organization, a corporate office, or regional office, if they're in growth phase, it depends on which phase they're in startup phase and they're going from 10 hotels to 25 to 30, they double in size. Usually that's what happens in our industry. You kind of double in size in chunks. Is the structure set for that next phase of growth? Are they already making the changes, or they already have the protocols in place? Is the design, is almost like architecture, is that right? And then the second part is the culture. Do they have a culture of growth? Have they left kind of the fire drill culture to being a little bit more strategic? Have they moved even from a growth phase into maturity? Have they moved on from that phase and started looking at consumer research? Do they have a culture of data and intelligence? So there's two different elements which kind of tells me, hey, they're in the right place or they're not.
And what would you say is sort of an early signal that an organization is designed for growth, or that it is stuck, as you say, in its own structure?
I think there's usually a dichotomy when they've grown and they've built structures and they've gone down a certain path, hence why straight path. But they've gone down that path, but they haven't really realized what was already working and what needs to be replicated at what I call hotel head office. So you have the hotel structure, which is very solid in our industry. You've got a GM and you've got HODs. Do you have that line of sight and that those silos, those basically pillars, straight from the front line all the way up into head office? Have you created those exact silos on those teams, those functions that can have that straight line all the way to the front line? Otherwise, you don't have a strong line of communication. And therefore, you don't have a strong line of strategic cascading. Therefore, you don't have a strong line of data and analytics and flow. That flow, that's the first thing they need to look at.
I suppose if people haven't experienced it, haven't been down that road, it'd be quite easy to make duplications.
Exactly, duplications or things that you don't need, or things that you're seeing elsewhere, and you say, "Oh, that's great." So XYZ company has this function and that function, but you know what? They're in Asia. And their distribution is heavily, influenced by XYZ source market, or maybe their tier structure is 90% or 40% luxury, and you're mid-scale. Things need to be customized, right? And things need to look like what your portfolio is.
Okay, and just because you're doubling in size doesn't necessarily mean you need to double the head count in all those different silos and so on. I suppose it is it's a path, it's a journey. Yeah.
Well, the brand thing is very important. Which brand tier are you looking at?
Yeah. And each one of those brands at sort of different stages of maturity. What's in your experience distinguishes a well-designed franchise organization from one that's merely functional?
I think, having built the Marriott franchise system back in support organization back 10 years ago. Looked at a few other, obviously players in the industry. It's from a consultant perspective. There's a blueprint. You would have a kind of operations, commercial, owner relations, analytics, finance, that type of functional setup from an org design perspective. But really, the one thing that distinguishes a good franchise organization is a solid connectivity with the development and brand function or team. Sometimes it can be a parallel universe versus the managed side, but the franchise team is a lot more restricted in what they can do just because of the franchise agreements. However, they still have to deliver on the same brand security that ultimately the traveler is looking for. And to do that, you have to be very in tune with A, the traveler, B, the brand, C, the development life cycle.
Okay. Yeah, no, I hear you. Having that understanding from the development process through to operational. Otherwise, you have somebody selling the dream of what can be delivered, and then a massive, potentially a massive disconnect. But if the two are really aligned and work together, then that can be super powerful. So if you had to choose one principle that underpins every successful transformation you've led, what would it be?
Very strong change management. Very, very strong. I think it's sometimes underestimated in our industry, but also in other industries. Transformation is looked at as a project management exercise. But in our industry, we're dealing with people. We're dealing with people on the ground. We're dealing with people in the head office. We're dealing with people as customers, right? Ultimately, we're not selling a phone. And that change management, bringing people along, getting them excited about change, about what's going to change, even if it's difficult. I think there's three principles I've always followed: status, certainty, and fun. Build that into the change management approach. Things tend to go according to plan.
I think it's the only way, isn't it? If you're going to embrace change, because definitely from the industry, I mean, we've both been on journeys where we've seen a whole world of change, and that is the one constant really is that every day is going to be different, and that brings variety and fun and interest. But of course, you are dealing with people, so it can be massively challenging because not everyone deals with change in the same way. The same, personally, I do embrace it, but other people they see it in a negative fashion. And so I guess that's your role, and that's where you specialize when you're looking at sort of organizational design, and then putting the right leadership in place to be able to scale effectively. When hotels or ownership groups move from single asset to multi-asset operations, where does structure usually fail first?
The first thing that fails is actually the leadership prioritization, or I call it levels of leadership. What happens is that they get more in the portfolio. They tend to continue the habits that were successful in managing a single asset, right? And then if I do more of that for each of those assets, then I'll the sum of parts will kick in, and I'll be successful in the multi-asset world. But it tends to be that you have to let go of things. You have to delegate. You have to push things out. You have to create maybe sometimes shared services. Sometimes you have to let the field do what it is, and you need to elevate your leadership activities and start looking at predominantly three things. Right, one is brand ambassadorship. Are you pushing the brand everywhere? Are you a talent scout, seeing who's the talent, making sure that the human capital is being planned properly, addressed properly? So that talent scout thing, and then you're the balanced scorecard champion. You want to look at the metrics that are the 4 or 5 metrics that are on the balanced scorecard that make the annual life cycle tick, not the daily metrics that you were looking at maybe as a GM or as a regional manager, et cetera, or even as an asset manager. But those three things kind of, it's letting go of the older habits and assuming the newer, more management habits.
Yes, there's a case there where leaders have to redraw accountability because, in essence, by scaling a portfolio, there's going to be a situation where you're going to be asking people to do more. They're going to have to broaden their skill set, their responsibility. How would you suggest that leaders do that they redraw accountability without creating more bureaucracy?
I think if you start off with the tool, which has really helped me in pretty much all life cycles that have been in terms of our business here, in hospitality. The balanced scorecard and strategy setting exercise, it starts with having that solid balanced scorecard. Now, balanced scorecard means metrics, right? What are you trying to achieve? And are those really relevant for whichever environment you're working in, right? But currently we're working in a very digital led environment. So digital room nights, for example, that has to be on your balanced scorecard.
Sure.
Obviously, our RevPAR, RPI maybe was the main. It still needs to be there, right? But there's some newer metrics that are coming out there. You design those metrics first, but the strategic initiatives are behind that on an annual basis. What are you going to do to move the needle? Are they cross-functional, projects? Are they heavy hitting? Is everyone involved? Is there strong project management, change management, communications, etc.? That
Mhm.
all becomes from that balanced scorecard. So it's not like your dashboard is different to your activities. They need to be one.
Yeah. And I guess across the organization, across the hotels, everyone has that visibility on that same balanced scorecard. So everyone is pulling and pushing in the right direction. And it's interesting. Graham and I spoke about it last week when we were talking about how do you know that a hotel is led from the P&L rather than just the SOP binder. And I think that's it, because those
Yeah.
KPIs, obviously it comes down to the end of the day, it comes down to profitability, it comes down to financial numbers. And so having the right data points, the right KPIs, and everyone's pushing in the right direction will really sort of set the path forward. Yeah. Raheel, you said before that org design is as much about mindset as it is about structure. What behaviors signal that leadership alignment is starting to slip?
I think when you start not paying attention to the voice of, I call it 3 Cs, the voice of the customer, voice of the company, and voice of the competition. The company includes employees, right? But
Okay.
when you start, when you're small, when you've got one asset, two, three, 10, you're very close to the front line. You're close, your ears to the ground. You have a pulse. You have a finger on the pulse of the business because it's easier, even physically, to visit XYZ, X hotels in a year or in a month, right? Look at so much reports, etc., like that. So decision making is kind of based on reality, and I hate to use the word dashboard, but that really what it is. Whether it's
Hmm.
a visual that you see when you're on the ground and you're visiting, or it's something that you're seeing on your screen, um, those signals are real. They tend to get convoluted as you're getting bigger because you're starting to look at different things. But if you go back to the voice of the customer and you come back to consumer intelligence in competitive intelligence, what other people are doing, what is your company saying, what are frontline people saying? Nearly $1 trillion industry of consumer research based on surveys and whatnot. The biggest survey staff that you have, or biggest data point, is your frontline employees. How often do you actually tap them for information, for advice, even, right? And these days with a lot more enablement, those things are really key to making that work.
Yeah, I love that because it's true. The associates, the employees in the hotel, they're talking to the guests. And whilst we have all these surveys and so on, but not everyone gets a survey. And people have survey fatigue. They don't want to be. I mean, I never fill in a survey. I simply don't have the time. But if people there talking to the guests, they hear when they check in, at the bar and so on, is real time feedback that is essential because the needs and wants of the traveller continue to evolve and change throughout the year, the seasons, and so on. And so, hearing that firsthand and having that non-diluted provides clarity, which for me is something I'm super passionate about when there is so much noise out there. What's your approach to embedding clarity, roles, rhythm, and decision rights without killing the entrepreneurial spirit?
I think that's the main thing, is that back to that culture point, right? Structure and culture. If the culture, I have this theory, untested, but I've kind of not lived by it, but noticed it in various geographies or various locations. I think that where a business starts from in terms of the city, and it absorbs the flavor of that city. So if you have a headquarter for a hotel chain that comes from Dubai versus one that comes from Seattle or Toronto or
Hmm.
London or Frankfurt or
Hmm.
Singapore, those brands tend to absorb or be, representative of the culture of that city. It's just the way the
Oh,
business is done.
without a
You
doubt. You
don't
look at
want to lose
Rosewood,
that,
you look at Mandarin
right?
Oriental. It's yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. You got, high end Hong Kong, Singapore, luxury. It's got that cachet. Even if you
Mm,
back in the day when you had, Starwood and Marriott, I used to say there was a very big asset of mind share versus market share. You have a New York based company, and New York is a brand led, city. It's and Starwood, with you had 50 hotels, and the brand awareness was phenomenal for just 50 hotels. I mean, if you have a 50 hotel portfolio right now, you
yeah,
you try to get the world to know it's hard to
very
do, right?
difficult.
Mindshare,
Yes.
the New
Mm,
York captures very
it's in the
difficult.
DNA.
DC, solid P&L. Yeah,
Sure.
it's in the DNA. But again, Marriott with, solid on the P&L. On the the management side of, because it's coming from DC, it's the US government is one of the world's best managed organizations, right? So very, very good structure, very good market share, so those two things, again, you have to pay attention into where you don't want to lose that culture of where that company is starting from. And for me,
Mm,
I always tend to look at where is the city that they're starting from an almost sociological perspective. And then the structure, well, if the culture is flexible, but if the culture is hierarchical, then you design that structure, right? You can't build
mm.
a suspension bridge on clay sand. You have to have solid bedrock, right? Things need to match the culture first, then you design it almost like an architect would.
It's interesting, isn't it? Especially in the franchise world, because I fear sometimes that the franchise properties are pulled a little bit because if you have a brand associated with the hotel, be it the Hiltons, the ISGs, Marriott, where there's a particular culture which they talk about, then you've got the culture of the franchise organization itself, and then possibly as well the owning company organization. And so there's this push and pull. But you're right, you have to be very clear, and sometimes it's just boiling it down to what those essentials are, those non-negotiables. This is what our core values, and then we build from there. Let's pivot a little bit. In the beginning, you talked about consumer research. I want to touch on commercial intelligence. How do you turn consumer research into action at property level?
Share that research as soon as it comes out. There's no waiting for it. The longer you wait for that report to be generated, if it's pages of information, or sometimes it can be very daunting.
Mm,
You have to, again, look at it from a training angle, right? We may do training now in our in the industry. It's bite-sized learning. Even if you just look at it from a just a social perspective, people are consuming 30-second videos at the max. So you need to really make sure that the delivery of that information is it suits the person that's actually learning about it. But
hmm
at the same time, you want to make sure that the content that you're giving them, you're making the big point stand out. Look, if 40% of, or at least 25% of all Gen Z and Alpha are booking travel based on a TikTok or Instagram reel influencer, that's you want to make that real for them, right? You want to send that information out and say, look, next time you're speaking to someone at check-in or whatever, no, think about how they've booked. They haven't booked through booking.com now, right? So
Interesting.
these are the kind of things you want to make it, yeah. But you want to make it also, um, you know, impacting back to this balanced scorecard. Why am I telling you this? Because I
hmm
want you to maybe drive more guest satisfaction. Maybe you want to drive a repeat booking.
Okay. Well, no, that's really interesting, and that sort of provides a link between these dense sort of insight decks that we've all seen and received, and trying to sort of break that down and get some clarity and real world behavior and how to change it. The distribution, that's really interesting. Then that the new generation of travelers today aren't following the same pattern that their parents and predecessors have, and it continues to change. And who knows when the likes of OpenAI get into travel, and Google becomes more prevalent, it's going to continue to change, isn't it? And how we embrace that and adapt that is going to
Mhm.
be where companies will succeed or fail. Where are owners still guessing in your thoughts in terms instead of listening to the data? Can you share an example maybe where guest insight reshaped a commercial strategy?
Yes, I think this may not be for every owner out there, but definitely I think Africa is a frontier economy from a hotel development perspective. I think everyone's entering into that as a kind of the next major geographic market. One of my projects that I'd done previously was, had looked at proper HNWI research for what do people want in safaris, but not just the current source market mix,
Mm.
the future source market mix, right? And that defined, so asking the Chinese traveler, the Indian traveler, right, the UAE and the KSA traveler, the Saudi traveler, what, because those are they're coming and they're already interested in that market just as much as the US and UK was.
Hmm.
What do you want to see on safari, right? And there's certain touch points that were, like, for example, F&B was huge, right? That you wanted to have that elevated, let's just say, Michelin star experience, but out in the bush. You have to put that into your program. You have to change your brand, pillars to have that as a signature element, which we did. So things like that make you operationalize it as soon as you do that research.
I guess it's predicting what they want and what they will need, but also introducing them to things that they don't even know that they want or need. That's where the magic can happen. In your experience, what separates data-rich brands that act slowly from leaner teams who act fast and win?
Culturally, it was more of a culture of empowerment. But I think from a data perspective, there's usually what data points you're actually looking at. You can look at tons of data, right? There's you can have 100-point dashboard. You can have, but what I've tried to do is when I work with clients is that create an index. It's like, there's so many stocks you could look at, right? But the index, the stock market as index, how things are going, right?
Hmm. Yes.
And even if your own portfolio, you have a portfolio view and say, look, and it has ratings and all that, but that's
Mm.
personal to you, your portfolio and your
Sure.
index. It's quicker, right? It tells you at a glance, how am I doing? And it's creating an index of metrics. And that index score is much more palatable, much more easier to look at on a daily, weekly basis, as you have different forums. You should have, weekly meetings, etc., with leadership teams, monthly, quarterly review, then your annual. So it just makes it a lot more easier to create an index.
Yes, I love that, and something as well that is potentially bespoke to you, things that are important to your portfolio, because every portfolio is different, especially if you're working across brands, especially if you have different age of hotels, different size of hotels, different markets. So having that index is actually a lot more powerful because it makes sense to your hotels and what you're trying to achieve. Because you may be looking to the hotel, keep that hotel infinitum, or it might be a hotel that you're looking to exit in the next 5 to 7 years. Let's talk a little bit about strategic planning and execution. You specialize in turning strategy into momentum. What's the discipline that keeps a plan alive beyond the workshop slide deck?
I think there's a bit of discipline that's required to make sure that what you've agreed on in that workshop, maybe 5, 6, sometimes 10 items, but I like to keep it to 5. I think it's much more manageable. Are reviewed regularly. You need to have as your monthly kind of leadership meeting happens, a chunk of that is, here's what's going on, the movement, the progress on those 5 strategic projects that we aligned on first, and so that's how you keep it alive
Hmm.
as it's going. As it's going, there's a very key theme that I've learned in my experience, is to know that there's something called emergent strategies. Strategy gets set in one thing, but it's not like putting into your Google Maps, I want to go to this direction, and it'll give you live traffic updates. But as you get live traffic, as you're going along, things may be getting sidetracked. Some things might change. You get new information. New information should change. So you change emerge your strategy as you're going along, tweak it, maybe refine it. So it's not just at that single point in time at the beginning of the year. It takes your path takes you along all the way to the end of the year.
Well, that's it, isn't it? We're talking long-term strategies when we're talking about hotels, definitely hotel agreements and franchise agreements. How do you measure progress when results sometimes take 6 months to show up on the P&L?
Yeah, I think some of it is a hypothesis, right? You test your hypothesis, you look at your data, and you say, okay, look, if we do this, technically this should work. We've seen this
Hmm.
work elsewhere. It's a bit of a scientific way of looking at it, but from a intuitive perspective, is you can start seeing lead measures before you see the lag measures, right? You see early
Hmm.
signs of, if you say you've wanted to increase your digital room night mix and you start seeing more traffic visit because you've suddenly upgraded the photography, and you start seeing a bit, the conversion might take some time, and ultimately this channel mix might take some time. but you see some good measures. So those are just as important as the lag measures on the results
Yeah,
chart.
yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head at the beginning then when you talked about the regular communication, the regular meetings, knowing what the key indexes are that you're going to be looking at and tracking it and sharing the responsibility amongst the team. There's a lot of in the world of hotel and especially world of franchising. There's a lot of people and people need to keep happy. So when you're advising franchise owners, how do you balance, say, the brand strategy with the local market realities? Sometimes very different.
Yeah, sometimes very different. But ultimately, look, an owner or franchisee has signed a franchise agreement for a brand based on certain pro forma, certain feasibility studies, and maybe some certain preferences because you may want a mid-scale brand versus a premium brand.
Hmm.
You are trying to balance that. You have to understand, okay, what is the brand strategy? Yes, the brand wants to have a certain leadership, brand or market leadership within a collection of brands. You have a local responsibility as a brand ambassador to make that happen. But if you look at the SOPs and if you look at the way delivery of that brand is, usually there's some flexibility there. That's when you start localizing. You don't go away from the SOP, fudge it, or because that will ultimately detract from the brand security that the customer is looking for. But you start localizing those SOPs as much as you can. So if a certain brand has to have a very strong kind of F&B signature restaurant, let's say a more premium brand, or a mid-scale brand has to have a hot breakfast requirement, localize that and make it more interesting, right? It's hot breakfast. Why does it need to be just croissants or scrambled eggs? Make it more local and be creative at that point. From a P&L perspective, you're in a low cost labor environment, and the Manning guide says you need to have 3 people, but you can afford to have 6 people or two, or depend. You have tech.
Hmm.
Increase those investments because you can, right? So ultimately the P&L, the numbers are the same, but you're executing with whatever is the local business culture or market, what the market can serve up to you. So
Hmm.
it's those types of things where you deviate from the brand standards. You just want to deliver them, or in a more locally relevant way.
And what would you say are the biggest execution traps that you see, and how do you help clients avoid reverting to business as usual?
the it's an execution gap. And when it comes to execution, you do need to invest in tech. And what I mean by tech is you need a very solid tool, a deployment and implementation tool. There's several out in the industry. I mean, we've grown by leaps and bounds, especially now. There's some. I'm a mentor for one of the largest tech incubators, Plug and Play. They have a travel industry incubator. I come across many startups that are using not just AI but other tech
Hmm.
at their disposal to basically make a better re-engineer processes that are kind of pretty much archaic. And if you look at it from where when they were initially created for our industry, and that same thing goes for execution. There's a lot of execution management, implementation management tools out there that can help you to deploy a task list to
Okay,
multiple units and
right.
keep track of what's happening. And that's very important because you can't do it running off Excel sheets anymore.
No. Well, if you're trialing things, you need that feedback. You need to know whether it's worked and whether we're going to continue to do this or we're going to try to do something else. Yeah, interesting. Okay. So tech is an important element that people need to be investing in. And there is so much out there now in terms of price point, in terms of AI, in just terms of tech that can work with your existing stack. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's interesting, especially with still a lot of the big brand companies that are still stuck in the legacy world with some of these long-term agreements. It's interesting when you talk to the franchisees, and they can be a lot more nimble. They can afford to take some more risk because it's at a smaller scale, and they can fail, but they can fail quickly. Which I think is very important when you're looking to scale and grow. Let's talk about what you've seen and looking ahead. What has the past year taught you about consumer behavior? Because I know in the past you and I have spoken quite a bit about trends and how the industry is evolving. Any consumer behavior or owner priorities that you didn't see coming this year?
I think if I look at this, we're in a new age of travel post-pandemic. The
Mm,
post-pandemic consumer realities are very different to 2019 and beyond, before.
hmm
Certain things have accelerated by leaps and bounds, and one is the change in booking path, right? I think that has, I think post pandemic 2022 ish, there was more e-commerce and online retail, growth than 10 years before that, right? And same thing happened in our industry. But what's also happened in our industry is the enticement. If a picture was 1,000, whereas people would search for, search results, and Google is a text result. Now people are bypassing that and going straight to TikTok and Instagram, or whichever media, the social media platform, and doing search in that platform. And those search results are
okay.
visual. They're video,
Right.
right? They're
Right.
not. So if right? So if a picture was 1,000 words, now
Mm.
a video is 1,000,000 words, and my booking put eventually it'll come. But TikTok's already invested in travel, and Google will do the same. But if you can book immediately while seeing that fantastic drone video that you have seen of a very beautiful waterfall somewhere in Croatia,
Click to
like
buy. Easy. Yeah. You just click on through and
click
that's
to
the
buy.
path.
Exactly,
That's very interesting.
exactly. That's the path.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
And
because the
that
thing
that
is,
that will change the way we market and distribute inventory and et cetera. All our
yeah, yeah.
commercial modus operandi will change.
Of course, all the banks are very focused on this in the fintech space with, historically you'd have your credit cards and so on. Then all of a sudden, Apple made such a seismic change with Apple Pay, but then everyone else is looking on how to get into that and how the OTAs will develop and fight back on that. If you could, if you could design or redesign one thing in how hotel groups make decisions today, what would you change first?
I would, and this takes me back to my on property years, right? We had a daily heartbeat. This was a report that I was in charge of the business intelligence and operational excellence department. It was on me to report out, especially on customer satisfaction. But we had a heartbeat. We call it a heartbeat report. And every day, we would take all the surveys that would come in. We'd get tens and dozens of them because it was a large resort. And we invested in some sophisticated macros and Excel,
Hmm.
programming to take lots of data and send it out before the morning meeting. But
Okay.
that heartbeat, that really heartbeat before the morning meeting, gave everyone, okay, this is what happened yesterday. This is the results. Here's the priority for today. And if I could design something for a corporate function, for a franchise operator, for a third party operator,
Hmm.
for that, for a similar thing, which gives you a pulse of how your business, your portfolio is doing on a daily basis,
Yes.
that really keeps things alive
Completely.
and
Well,
keeps
I
us
love it.
grounded.
I love it having that. And I think almost getting to the point where it could be real time. There's no need to
It's
even
real time,
wait until a
real
morning.
time.
It's just literally there.
Absolutely.
This is what's happening there. It's really exciting. I can't fathom what the future will hold, even in the year ahead. What projects or themes excite you most for 2026, either with Straight Path or across the wider industry?
I think there's just the growth in the mid-tier hospitality player. What I mean by that is, 10, 15 years ago, you had the Marriotts, the Hiltons, IHGs, of course. They were about, internationally, there were about 500 hotels plus, maybe, growing 300. They're now at 1,000 plus. But then below, right now, you have, local chains that are now becoming more regional, and they've come from 10 to 50 hotels to now 100, and some other chains which are maybe international. They're properly getting into that international operations phase. I think that's that growth and evolution of those players as the industry grows. But that to me really excites me, because I think there's a lot more diversity and a lot more creativity than coming out. And so I think we should see in the next few years some very interesting brands, because different people are creating them.
And I think brands and concepts that are very different to how we see a hotel today. I've been looking a lot at pod and capsule hotels, also hostels. This space where, again, the most important thing is price point, it's location, but it's also, still the quality of the brand and so on. But if you are a new company, a new concept, if you've got the distribution, you've got the digital side of things, and you can scale quickly without the legacy systems, it's, yeah, because talks to the needs and
Absolutely.
wants of the new traveler, which are very different, very different.
Which is very different. Exactly.
It's going to be interesting to see how it develops over the next couple of years. What's one thing that you wish every owner did before starting a brand strategy review? This is your opportunity to
If
tell
they
owners
look,
what you think.
yeah, no, I think owners will look at it from a asset perspective. Mostly, it depends on how passionate they are, but I think the brand strategy that when they review it should match your own brand. It's one of the most important things in the world we do from a travel perspective, creating kind of corridors for people to visit, whether domestically or internationally. And I think if you're passionate about a certain type of brand, your own brand, right, and then you invest into a hotel brand of a similar type, I think that congruency really helps. The owner's always vested in it versus buying a brand and saying, okay, it's just it's a factory for me, right? I get my return on it. But I think travel is a very important thing that we need to upkeep in this world.
I think so. As an owner or an investor, having passion about what it is that you're ultimately selling, really, if your heart's not in it and if you're looking at it just from the numbers side of things, I don't think it necessarily will have the trajectory that it could have, that you have that passion for it. Raheel, I've got one last question for you, and as a bit of a takeaway, your favorite leadership habit for keeping teams commercially sharp?
Having one main metric, right? May change year by year,
Okay.
but team, this is the year of digital room night growth. Team,
Okay.
this is the year of revenue RevPAR index growth, right?
Loyalty enrollments.
Loyalty enrollments, exactly. This is the year for loyalty
Yeah.
enrollments. This is a year for reducing, source market reliance on XYZ source market.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, I think having that one shining light is very powerful, keeping people on track. Thank you, Raheel. That was incredibly insightful. I enjoyed our conversation from organizational design and leadership alignment through to the discipline of turning strategy into momentum. There's a huge amount here for owners and operators who want to scale with clarity rather than noise. If you'd like to learn more about Raheel's work or connect with Straight Path Consultancy, I've added contact details below. Next week, I'm joined by Ashley Donald from Halo Business Consulting, where we shift into storytelling, openings, and how hotels can lead and protect their narrative in a world increasingly shaped by AI summaries and automated decision making. It will be a brilliant follow on, actually, from today's conversation. I can't wait to share it with you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next boardroom conversation.